The email came at exactly 2:14 a.m., jolting me from the thin thread of sleep I'd been clinging to. The notification glow lit up the corner of my dark bedroom like a small, unwelcome spotlight. No subject line, no message, just an attachment named "For You." Half asleep, I almost let it go. My mind whispered all the logical excuses. Wrong address, accidental send, some late-night document from a client. But then my eyes caught the sender's name. David, my business partner. My friend for nearly a decade. And just like that, my pulse kicked up a gear. I sat up, propping myself against the headboard, the pale light of the laptop casting ghostly shadows on the walls. Clicking it open, I braced for a spreadsheet or a PDF draft of the deal we'd been working on. Something routine, predictable, safe. But what filled my screen in that quiet hour wasn't work. It wasn't safe. It wasn't routine. It was a single photograph, and in it, my wife, Clara. Her face was familiar, achingly familiar, framed in a way that felt private, unguarded. The kind of moment meant for one person only. The lighting was soft, almost deliberate, her smile not the polite kind she wore at dinners, but something warmer, more dangerous. My fingers went cold against the laptop keys. I scrolled down, and more photos followed. Every new click was a fresh fracture in the fragile reality I'd built around my marriage. I could feel my breathing change, shallow, uneven. My ears rang, drowning out the faint hum of the ceiling fan above. I gripped the edge of the desk with one hand, my knuckles turning white. David had these. David, the man who'd been with me through countless late nights building our company, the one who'd celebrated my wedding day with a glass raised high, who'd stood in my living room holding my newborn niece. Why did he have these? Clara and we'd been together for 6 years, married for almost 4. Our life was steady, maybe even predictable in the best way. Shared coffee in the mornings, arguments over the thermostat, laughter over bad TV, and David had always been part of that picture. The three of us had been a trio at times. Double dinners, weekend barbecues, small gatherings where Clara would roll her eyes at his jokes, and I'd laugh along. Never once had I considered that there might be a current beneath the surface. But now, staring at these images, I couldn't unsee it. Small memories came clawing back. The way she once lingered in a hug with him, the private murmurs I'd assumed were harmless, the smiles exchanged across a table that I'd dismissed as friendly. My throat felt tight, as if my body was trying to swallow the reality whole and failing miserably. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one sharper than the last. It was 2:27 a.m., and I knew sleep had abandoned me. I pushed the laptop away, but the images had burned themselves into my brain, refusing to let me rest. Every time I blinked, I saw her face again. That smile, that setting, those eyes. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over Clara's contact, then David's. My instincts screamed to call, to demand answers, to throw every accusation I could into the dead of night. But another part of me, colder, more calculating, told me to wait. If I confronted them now, I'd get denials, deflections. I needed to be sure. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood. Outside, the streetlight pooled a weak yellow glow onto the empty pavement. I sat there, hunched in my chair, feeling like the world had shifted in a way I couldn't yet name. I thought of the vows Clara and I had exchanged, the promises whispered in the dark when the rest of the world felt far away. Were those moments lies too? Or had something changed along the way? By dawn, the decision had taken root inside me. This wasn't going to be a conversation over breakfast. This was going to be the beginning of something I couldn't undo. No matter how much I wanted the clock to turn back to the moment before I opened that email. I shut the laptop, but the darkness didn't feel any less heavy. The sun was still hours away, and in that long stretch of night, one thing became certain. This was going to change everything, forever. Morning light crept through the kitchen window in thin streaks, falling across the counter like blades of gold cutting through shadow. It should have felt like any other day. The soft hiss of the kettle, the earthy smell of coffee, the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But nothing felt normal. Not after last night. The light didn't feel warm. It felt like it was shining directly on the thoughts I'd been trying to hide. I placed 2 mugs on the counter out of habit, my hands moving like they'd done 1,000 times before, while my mind replayed the glow of my laptop and those cursed images. The bedroom door opened with a soft creak and Clara walked in. Her hair was damp, framing her face in dark strands that clung to her skin. She was wearing that pale blue robe I'd bought her last winter. She smiled at me, her eyes calm, almost tender. "Morning," she said, leaning in to kiss me. I let her, but there was the smallest pause before I moved, just enough for me to feel it, even if she didn't notice. "Morning," I replied, sliding her coffee across the counter. The mug scraped faintly on the tile, the sound sharp in the quiet. She started talking about the weather, about needing to run errands, about a yoga class Jessica had convinced her to join. Her words floated between us, but I wasn't really listening. Finally, I asked, "Hey, did you send any pictures to anyone lately?" She froze for the smallest moment. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. A quick laugh escaped her lips. Light, casual, but forced. "What? No. Why would you even ask that?" she said, reaching for her coffee a little too quickly. "Just wondering," I murmured, studying her face. There was a tension at the corners of her mouth that she couldn't quite hide. She took a sip and shook her head. "You're acting weird this morning." I almost told her. Almost shoved the laptop in front of her, made her look at every image, every detail. But I knew she'd deny it unless I had something she couldn't talk her way out of. So I smiled faintly and said, "Guess I'm just tired." The words tasted bitter on my tongue. By noon, the decision was made. I needed to see David face to face, not in the office, somewhere away from anyone who could overhear. I texted him, "We need to talk, in person." His reply came quick. "Sure." "Office?" I typed back. "No, somewhere private." We met after work in a quiet bar far from the city center. The air smelled of old wood and whiskey. Light pooled weakly over scratched tables. David was already there when I arrived, leaning back in the booth like it was just another meeting. But I could see something in his eyes. Caution, maybe. I slid into the seat across from him. "Why'd you send me those pictures?" His smile faltered for just a second. "So you saw them?" "Don't play games," I said flatly. "Where did you get them?" He leaned back, tracing a finger along the rim of his glass. "Clara sent them to me a while back. I thought you should know." My jaw tightened. "Why now?" "Because," he said slowly, "I think she's still sending things to someone else." The drive home felt longer than it should have. Red lights seemed to last forever. David's words echoed in my head like a drumbeat, still sending things to someone else. When I walked in, the house was warm, scented faintly with the vanilla candles Clara liked to light in the evenings. She was curled up on the couch, blanket draped over her legs, a book resting on her lap. She looked up and smiled, the same smile that used to make me feel at home. Now I wasn't sure what it meant. "Hey," she said, closing her book partway. I sat in the armchair opposite her. "I talked to David today." Her eyes shifted, just enough to notice. "Oh?" "I know about the photos, Clara." She blinked. "What photos?" "The ones you sent to David." Her fingers gripped the blanket tighter. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it," I said, my voice sharp but low. She swallowed, tears brimming. "We were flirting. It was stupid. I never meant for it to be serious." "Flirting?" I repeated, heat rising in my voice. "You sent him that while you were married to me?" "It was during that rough patch we had," she said quickly. "You were always at the office. I felt invisible." I shook my head slowly. "That's your excuse." She bit her lip, looking away. "David twisted things. He started threatening to tell you if I didn't." She stopped cold. "If you didn't what?" I pressed. Her silence was the only answer I needed, and it was worse than anything she could have said. That night, the house felt smaller than ever, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what neither of us was saying. Clara stayed curled up on the couch long after our conversation had died into silence. I stayed in the armchair, staring at the edge of the rug, tracing the pattern with my eyes just to keep from looking at her. Every second felt stretched thin, fragile. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, like it was taunting us both. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't want you to find out this way." I let out a humorless laugh. "What way did you want me to find out, Clara? On our anniversary? In a text from him?" Her eyes flashed with hurt, but it didn't feel earned. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was a stupid thing I got caught up in. "You sent him photos meant for me," I said flatly. "That means something, whether you like it or not." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then pulled the blanket tighter around herself like it could protect her from the weight of what she'd done. "Was it just him?" I asked. "Or is David right? Is there someone else?" Her hands trembled. "It's not like that." "That's not an answer," I pressed. "Yes or no?" She didn't meet my eyes. "I talked to someone online. It wasn't physical. It just—" "Stop," I said sharply. "Do you hear yourself? Do you realize what you're admitting to?" Tears slid down her cheeks, but I wasn't sure if they were for me or for herself. "I was lonely, Michael. You were always gone. I felt like I didn't exist to you anymore." I leaned forward, my voice low. "Then you talk to me. You don't go to him. You don't go to anyone else. That's what you do when you love someone." She covered her face with her hands, her voice muffled. "I messed up." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and choking. They didn't change anything. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, needing space, needing air that wasn't thick with betrayal. I leaned against the counter, staring at the row of knives in the block, wondering when my marriage had started to feel like a stranger's life. Her footsteps came softly behind me. "Please, and don't shut me out. We can fix this." I turned to face her. "You want me to pretend this didn't happen? To pretend I can look at you the same way?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't lose you." The irony twisted in my chest. "You didn't think about losing me when you hit send, Clara." Her lip quivered. "I didn't think it would get this far." "It always gets this far," I said quietly. "That's the part you never see until it's too late." I didn't sleep in our bed that night. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her crying in the bedroom. Every sob felt like a small stone being dropped into a deep well inside me. I thought about the early years, about how she used to wait up for me when I worked late, how she'd text me at lunch just to say she missed me, how her laughter used to feel like sunlight. Now all I could hear was David's voice. "I think she's still sending things to someone else." The next morning I left before she woke up. The air outside was crisp, the street still half asleep. I drove without a destination, ending up parked outside the office long before anyone else arrived. Inside, I closed the blinds in my office and sat in the dark. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Clara, a string of messages I couldn't bring myself to read. By noon, I'd made another decision. I called my lawyer. His voice was calm, measured, the way lawyers are when they've heard this story 100 times. He asked me questions I never thought I'd have to answer. About assets, about joint accounts, about the house. When I hung up, it felt like I'd stepped off a cliff and there was no going back. That evening, I walked back into the house with papers in my hand. Clara was at the kitchen table, her eyes red, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Next steps," I said, placing the papers on the table. "I'm not doing this anymore." Her face crumpled. "No, no, please, Michael, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll do anything." I shook my head. "If you do anything, we wouldn't be here." She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. That small motion felt bigger than any argument we'd ever had. "I can forgive mistakes, Clara, but betrayal, that's not a mistake. That's a choice." Her breath caught. "You're ending it." I met her eyes, feeling the weight of every word. "You already did." I woke before dawn to a sky the color of ash, the kind of gray that makes you wonder if the sun will bother showing up at all. The suitcase lay open on the bed, its mouth a dark, waiting silence, and I began folding my life into corners and zippers like it could all be contained that easily. Shirts first, then the framed photo from our first road trip, then the mug she bought me with the chipped handle I never threw away. I paused at the edge of the dresser where our wedding bands used to rest every night, and for a moment my breath refused to move. Clara stood quietly in the doorway, one hand on the jamb like she needed the house to hold her up. Her eyes were swollen but dry now, as if she'd run out of rain. "Do you really have to go today?" she asked, and her voice sounded smaller than the room, smaller than the suitcase, smaller than the space between us. "Yes," I said, because anything else would only be another delay pretending to be mercy. The house had begun to echo. Even our footsteps returned to us like answers we didn't want to hear, and I realized how quickly absence becomes a kind of furniture. I took the file of printed emails, timestamps, the folder of images I wished I had never seen, and sealed them in a manila envelope, as if sealing a wound could stop the bleeding. On the kitchen table, the papers from the lawyer were pressed flat under a glass paperweight, and the sunlight tried to read them, but seemed to look away. We sat across from each other the way strangers do when a train stops between stations, close enough to hear breathing, far enough to miss the point. "I talked to a therapist," she said, sudden, brittle, as if pulling a last thread. "She says shame can be a tunnel, not a wall." "I hope it is," I replied, and the truth surprised me by not tasting of bitterness. "I hope it leads you somewhere brighter than this." She nodded and something in her shoulders loosened, the kind of loosening that happens when the future stops arguing with the past. I signed where the flags told me to sign, my name becoming a bridge between who I was and who I would have to be next. When she took the pen, her hand trembled once, then steadied, and I realized courage isn't the absence of shaking, it's the act of writing anyway. We agreed on the house. She would keep it, at least for now, because I never wanted its walls to remember my anger more than our laughter. I called the moving truck and felt absurdly grateful for the ordinariness of logistics. Numbers and times don't lie the way people do. Before the movers arrived, I walked room to room like a quiet museum, touching door frames with the back of my fingers, inventorying moments no one would catalog but me. The hallway where we danced to no music, the bathroom mirror where we left notes in steam, the balcony where winter taught us how to share a blanket and call it truce. On the nightstand, I found a folded note, 3 lines, careful handwriting, my name at the top like a question. "I'm sorry, I'm learning. I will carry this the right way." I placed the note in the envelope with the evidence, not out of cruelty, but because history needs context or it becomes a weapon. The movers came like clockwork, professional and gentle, lifting boxes that felt heavier than their labels, as if regret had density. Clara helped without speaking, handing me a sweater I'd missed, a charger, a book I'd promised to finish. Our kindness is small but real, survivors of a larger storm. When the last box left the threshold, we lingered in the entryway where we used to kiss goodbye, as if the door needed one more meaning before it learned a new one. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, voice steady. "Just permission to try to be better than the person I was with him." "You don't need my permission," I answered, and meant it. "But I hope you take your own." Outside, the truck door thudded shut, and the sound folded the moment into something final, like a book closing after the last chapter writes itself. I drove to a furnished rental across town, a place that smelled like lemons and unfamiliarity, where the couch didn't know the shape of us. I set the suitcase down and listened to the apartment's newness breathe. Emptiness has a rhythm if you don't try to drown it out. That evening, I met David in a glass conference room our attorneys had arranged, the city bending around us in mirrored fragments like it couldn't bear to look directly. He arrived late, his tie loosened, apology ready on his face, a face I'd once associated with victory and now with a lesson I never asked for. "We'll dissolve the partnership cleanly," I said before he could start. "No theatrics. The numbers are in the packet. Sign where they've marked." He tried a softer route. "You were always the better half of this company, Michael. You know that, right?" I refused the bait of nostalgia. "Then do the best thing you've ever done for it. Let it go without a fight." His eyes flickered. the way a man's will flickers when it realizes the old playbook is written in a language no one speaks anymore. He signed, pen scratching across pages like a tire leaving the road, and with each stroke the scaffolding we'd built together turned to clean air. When it was done, he looked up, something like honesty crawling out from behind his practiced charm. "I don't have an excuse good enough to say aloud." "Then don't," I said, standing. "Let your silence be the apology words can't carry." In the elevator down, my reflection looked like someone I was still learning to recognize. Older around the eyes, yes, but steadier at the mouth. Back at the apartment, I opened a window and let the city's noise enter, like proof that life goes on without permission. Sirens, laughter, a bus sighing to a stop. I made dinner for one, a ritual I performed gently, as if feeding a friend who'd survived an accident and was relearning appetite. Afterward, I took the manila envelope to the river and stood on a pedestrian bridge where the water kept its own counsel, black and unreadable under the street lamps. I didn't throw it in. Some things don't belong to forgetting, they belong to record, to the quiet cabinet where truth sleeps without needing to be touched. But I did take out one photo from our early years, us under a red maple, cheeks cold, hands ridiculous in their insistence on holding on, and I let that single leaf of memory ride the current into elsewhere. The next days were practical and strangely holy. Setting up utilities, buying a plant that didn't know our history, choosing a lamp whose light didn't resemble our old rooms. At night, the apartment clicked and settled like a ship finding its balance, and I learned my own balance beside it, how to sleep without listening for another key in the door. Clara and I spoke only when necessary, and when we did, our voices wore gentleness like well-tailored coats, fitted, deliberate, not for show, but for warmth. Once she texted a photo of the living room after she'd moved the couch, asking if the angle looked better. I replied with a thumbs up and the word good, and meant both. My sister visited with a casserole and an unasked-for stack of jokes, and for the first time I laughed without worrying the sound would break something fragile. Therapy was a room with a fern, a box of tissues, and a woman who asked good, difficult questions. I learned to answer slowly, like untying knots without snapping the rope. I wrote lists, everything I'd given up, everything I'd gained, everything I didn't have to carry anymore, and was surprised which column grew the fastest. One evening, I found the chipped-handled mug wrapped in a sweater. I washed it and filled it with tea, and realized some artifacts are allowed to stay if they learn new stories. When the decree came through, clean lines, legal words, the gavel sound of stamps, I felt something unhook inside me, a clasp releasing on a necklace I'd worn too tight. I took a long walk after, past a street musician bending a song into a shape that sounded exactly like release, and I let myself imagine futures without flinching. Later, I wrote Clara a letter I never intended to send. 3 pages of thank yous and farewells sewn carefully together, because closure is often a private craft. I told her we had loved bravely for a time, and that bravery counts even when it ends. I told her the house deserved laughter again, and so did she. I told her I would keep the good without pretending the bad didn't happen. Then I folded the letter into the manila envelope, history and hope sharing a file, and slid it into the back of a drawer where it could rest without ruling me. On the first night I slept without dreaming, rain braided itself across the window like soft handwriting, and I woke to a quiet that didn't scare me. I brewed coffee in the new kitchen. The plant leaned toward the light like it trusted the day, and I realized tenderness can begin in a room with no past. I lifted the mug, stood by the open window, and breathed until breathing felt like something I was good at again. No trumpets, no grand declarations, just a steady pulse beneath everything, a life unclenching one small muscle at a time. And in that simple, ordinary rhythm, I understood the revenge I'd chosen was not spectacle, but survival. The radical act of building a self that no longer needed to be proven to anyone who had misused it. I don't know where Clara's tunnel leads, or what David sees when the mirror stops flattering him. Their roads aren't mine to measure anymore. What I do know is this: forgiveness is not an eraser, and justice is not always a courtroom. Sometimes both are the quiet decision to live well anyway. I finished my coffee, set the cup in the sink, and opened the door to a hallway that smelled faintly of jasmine and new paint, and I stepped forward without looking back. The day was bright, not because it owed me light, but because I had finally made enough room inside to let it in. It's strange how quickly life learns to fill the empty spaces you think will stay hollow forever. The apartment doesn't echo anymore when I walk through it. My footsteps have been replaced by the quiet shuffle of normal days finding their rhythm. Morning has become my favorite part of the day again. I wake before the alarm, open the blinds, and let the city's slow heartbeat reach me through the window. There's a small plant on the sill now, a fern, and I've been careful with it, maybe more careful than I've been with anything in years. Its green has become my proof that things can grow even after being uprooted. Sometimes when I water it, I think about all the things I once believed would die without her. The truth is, most of them didn't, and the ones that did, maybe they were meant to. I've stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. There's no urgent need to catch up with anyone's messages before I've caught up with myself. Instead, I brew coffee in silence, breathing in the warmth before the world asks anything of me. Clara's name still sits in my contacts. I haven't deleted it, but I don't scroll to it anymore. It exists the way an old street exists in a city, familiar, but no longer on my route. We've exchanged a few practical messages since the separation, bills, mail, small logistical knots to untangle, but nothing more. And I've realized something. You don't always need a final conversation, some neatly tied up goodbye. Sometimes a story ends without applause, and that's okay. David, I haven't heard from him since the day we signed the dissolution papers. I imagine he's somewhere trying to be the man he tells himself he is. That's not my story anymore. I've met new people, some through work, some through chance, and I no longer carry the weight of suspicion like a shield between us. It's not that I've forgotten, I haven't, but I've learned the difference between remembering and reliving. One keeps you wise, the other keeps you trapped. There are nights when I still think of the house, the sound of the front door clicking shut, the smell of rain on the balcony, but now those memories don't pull me backward. They just pass through, like weather. I've kept writing, not to her, but for myself. Pages and pages about the man I was, the man I'm becoming, and the space between those two versions. Some days I surprise myself by laughing without reason. Other days I notice I've gone hours without thinking about the betrayal at all. Both feel like victories. I've started cooking again. Real meals, not just what's quick. And the act feels almost like prayer, a slow, deliberate investment in my own well-being. I used to think revenge would mean seeing them fall apart. Now I understand the truest revenge is living in a way that makes their actions irrelevant. If I ever see Clara again, I think I'll thank her, not for the pain, but for the clarity it left behind. Because here's the truth I carry now. Trust is a gift you give once without knowing how much it costs. If it's broken, you can't buy it back, but you can choose to spend it better next time. And in the quiet of my new life, with the morning light pouring in, I know I've made that choice.